I will make an effort to summarize what was to bring a few points out of what was a very lively and interesting conversation. We didn't solve all the problems, but we did have a few very good ideas. We began by really kind of setting the stage. What do we mean by peace, and how do we focus on building peace rather than on war, on investing in war? We talked about the importance of being inclusive, that whatever we do as we move forward, that everyone needs to be at the table at all stages, both in terms of the development and the use of digital technology. We talked quite a bit about the importance of investment, that we are investing our resources and our creativity in preparations for war. Even in our definition of security is in relation to war and violence, and that it is very important for us to refocus our investment in education, in the formation of the value system, in the experimentation, if you will, around what makes for peace and how digital technology could fruitfully be used to help us build peace. We talked about several times about the imbalance in investment, and about two very specific examples. There probably were more, but the two that I can remember. One had to do with experimentation in gaming. How do we move a technology that has become enormously destructive and often focusing on violence? How do we move that to be a tool for shaping values and peace building? We think it's possible to do that, but it's going to take time and energy and effort, and some places where we can experiment with that. And the other is in research and education. Our hope would be that every Catholic university in the world would be investing in research and programming that would help us articulate well what makes for peace and how the digital age can contribute to that. We know that digital technology can move us in either direction, toward a more violent world or toward the possibility of peace. We're going to make a choice, and our hope is that we will make a choice and invest in a move toward the use of digital technology for the purpose of supporting nonviolent approaches to a peaceful world. Okay.
Thank you very much. Now we listen to the second group, cybersecurity, please.
Our moderators gave us the paradigm of thinking of this as a building code for security, with the scenario that every time there's a new startup, a new service, a new product, they seem to be building security from the ground up. And as a result, they go through the exact same problems again and again and again. So the conversation in our group centered around what are the best practices, what are the things that are most often overlooked, what are the basic principles that we would want to embed within the building plan, the security building plan. And we came up with, first of all, it's all about the data. It has to be about the data. And when we say it's about the data, it means you first consider the individual. Are you making your system in a way that the individual has full control over their data? Do they know who is using it? Do they know which organizations have it? Do they know what it's being used for? Do they have the ability to opt out of its use? And until you can answer that first level of questions, you can't get to the second level. The second level is going to be about the network. And if you are a network operator, you have to ask yourself the basic questions that a network operator must be able to answer to show that they can protect that data. Do they know who has access to the data? Can they revoke access to that data? Do they control the networks and devices on which that data will be stored? Are they legally responsible for that data? Do they know the weakest parts of their network, and are they doing due diligence to monitor those networks to make sure that that data is not being exfiltrated? Beyond that, we wanted to look at something a bit more systematic, because protecting the data is something that we can lay down in a policy paper if we sat everyone down in the room and had a night. But more important is this idea of education, because the education of individuals actually powers that first part. And it's not just education of young people. It's not just making it part of the curriculum so that people understand the issues involved in data protection. It's also continuing education, especially for adults, because adults have a really bad time with understanding what are the actual issues involved with sharing data. One of the examples that was brought up post-discussion was in the United States right now, there's a huge craze for genetic testing. You can find out where you're from and what people you are connected to. But there is very little awareness on the fact that that's not just your data. That is data that touches every single man, woman, and child that's even remotely blood related to you. That's a great analogy for the sharing of data in the modern world, with data being the most powerful weapon and the most impactful weapon that you can use on this planet today. You have a responsibility to protect that data that goes beyond your personal preferences. Is that about it? Did I miss something?
Thank you. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we listen to the third group, new weapons, please.
I would invite other members of the group to please fill in where I fail in touching on points. Well, we had a very interesting discussion about lethal autonomous weapons system and also about enhanced human beings, a.k.a. super soldiers. I don't think that we had complete unanimity in terms of the belief that autonomous weapons systems, those weapons which are not only a weapon but also can be a combatant, because they make the target and kill decision against a human being. The majority felt very strongly that there should be a positive, that states should be positively obliged to always have a human being in the target and kill loop. That they should never delegate the responsibility of killing a human being to a machine. That most of our group was pretty convinced that that's where the line could and should be drawn. There were thoughts about we needed to develop standards to understand how AI is trained and then how it comes to train itself. And this transparency, in theory, would allow us to know what to expect from artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if that's so, as it spins out of control, but it's a nice thing to think about. In terms of super soldiers, this is, of course, as it's called in the Olympics, gene doping. The Olympics has already outlawed gene doping in Olympic Games, that bioengineering is illegal in Olympic Games. I kind of think if the Olympics can make it illegal, the rest of society should as well. But we think that there should be a definition of soldier, physical soldier, and also, once that is very clear, and the obligations of the soldier vis-a-vis the military, there should be limitations on how their bodies and mind can be manipulated by the military to make them super soldiers. Anybody, did I forget something?
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, the fourth group, please. Nuclear weapons.
Yep, thanks. So we had a good discussion in which we, I think, expressed a lot of hope about the subject matter, even though it is a difficult one. So we started by centering ourselves on this question of what do nuclear weapons do, reflecting on the fact that was raised in the sort of initial discussion about modern nuclear weapons could kill, each one could kill 1 million people. and that we should pause and kind of consider that. And then members of our group sort of raised the question of intergenerational effects, which are unique to nuclear weapons in some way, that many generations on from Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear testing, people still are carrying mutations down the generations which are impacting people, and that this is something which is kind of uniquely scary, that we need to be careful about with these weapons, and that perhaps isn't always talked about in the policy discourse, but was something that we thought was important. So we also reflected that a lot of international discussion on nuclear weapons at the moment in some places is not in a good place, and also that today is a UN day for the total elimination for nuclear weapons, so it's a good time to be thinking about these things. We also discussed that the Pope is taking a very strong position on nuclear weapons at the moment, to do with not only the use of nuclear weapons being unacceptable, but also their possession. So we went on to discuss the connection with new technologies some more in regard to nuclear weapons, and all these sort of risk elements, a lot of which were raised in the keynote session before. Also examples which some of our group had direct experience of around human error and the risk in nuclear weapon systems at the moment, which are often sort of close to populated areas. And we kind of agreed between us that global leaders should be dealing seriously and thinking seriously about these weapons as a global issue for the common good of the whole Earth. So it's not just about the security of some countries, but similarly we were thinking to the climate crisis at the moment. This is about global effects, and there's an increasingly good conversation about the climate crisis at the moment, but not about nuclear weapons, and there's a real gap there. We also thought about how, considering what a world without nuclear weapons would look like is an ethical challenge for us to consider. The world today is very different to the world before nuclear weapons, and it's different to the world before the end of the Cold War as well. So how can we kind of rethink these ideas of defense without nuclear weapons and move past some of the kind of spaces that we're stuck in at the moment? We talked about how defense concepts of a lot of countries already include an increased kind of focus on the protection of civilians and the protection of populations, and that's an important development compared to how things were before. We need some ethical framework to sort of put the human back on the table in relation to these weapons. We then had a good sort of brainstorming discussion about how can new technology help us. We talked about the risks and the threats, but how can it help us in relation to dealing with nuclear weapons and new defense sort of paradigms for the common good. So we talked a lot about the need for education and awareness raising, and this idea of new tools and technologies for experience learning, which can help us truly understand what these technologies, what nuclear weapons are about, and how we should be kind of considering and discussing them. One of our group brought up that the International Committee of the Red Cross held an exhibition with just this kind of tool at a conference last year, which was very powerful. We also talked about how we could develop sort of a live ethical framework that other people could, a lot of people could be involved in to, have their education and awareness about nuclear weapons and give ownership of how we think about them back to people more. We also talked about if we think about, states have a right to defense, and nuclear weapons are a tool they see as part of that at the moment. Can sort of technological perspectives and perspectives from different stakeholders help us inform what that could look like in the future? And one thing that came up that we knew nothing about technically was how could technologies such as blockchain help us with dealing with issues of elimination and verification and accountability, as well as other things like that. So at the end of the session, we agreed on 3 principles, which we thought all the group could endorse. And these were that, so firstly, there are possibilities to change the system as it currently is, and as we know, with nuclear weapons. So we think there can be progress on this towards eliminating nuclear weapons. We think that human control over the use of all weapons, but in the context of our group discussion of nuclear weapons, is extremely important. and it can't be lost. There must also always be human management of these systems, so there shouldn't be any, delegation or handing over to, automated systems in relation to nuclear weapons. This is sort of extra crucial given the destructive power of these technologies. And also, we agreed that our final principle was that those who rely on nuclear weapons now need to think about how they can change and find a different approach to security and to create the culture for that. And we think there's a lot of room for kind of new technologies, experts and stakeholders to contribute to this rethinking and to develop a sort of new system here. So, and we agreed at the end that we really sort of felt hope on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you very much for... I thank the four group and many thanks for this rich presentation. Many elements, maybe only one, concerning our question of common good. Education was a crucial point, and I want to refer to what Monseigneur Dufay said this morning, quoting Paul Ricoeur. What are the good institutions in which we could develop ethical reflection concerning the common good? What are these good institutions? And I think that institutions of education are very crucial to educate people to the common good. Maybe we can think about also in the following session. And the second one is the necessity for a human control, meaningful human control. How is it possible? At which level? In which institution? Maybe we can think about this in order to precise our conception of common good. And now I propose to the speaker, and I know that Dr. Misiroli has to leave us, and maybe I propose some that you have some reaction concerning this working group, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, apology, but I will have to dash shortly before 5:30. And please take these consideration mine as my own. They are not representative of a NATO position. This morning I heard the term ethics by design, and I think that we should also say security by design. That should probably start also with our little devices. And I have to say that a kind of business model that has prevailed in the ICT industry so far certainly did not have security by design as its priority. The priority was to get quickly to the market because the benefits to be reaped were sensational. So maybe a degree of second thinking about this also from the private sector would be most welcome. Ethics and security by design also, when we talk about lethal autonomous weapon systems, very often you hear the term killer robots, terminators, robocops. To my knowledge, these applications still have a very limited use in the military worldwide, even in the most advanced countries. So I think we are to some extent overplaying an issue that is real, but that so far has not become a key tenet of military planners in this field. And there is a very good reason. By talking to some military planners myself, for instance in the United States, I very often ask, but are you using deep learning systems, artificial intelligence for your own purposes, particularly for defensive purposes? And the answer was, well, we have run a number of simulations, and in 99% of the cases, the outcome of using artificial intelligence and deep learning was escalatory effects. These machines, these systems are built to win. And even military planners, believe it or not, want to keep control of these things. They want to be able to de-escalate in a crisis, not just to go to the bitter end. And therefore, so far, at the technological level, there is a certain reluctance to rely entirely on these systems. I don't know whether the soldiers of the future will be robots or machines. That is, at this stage, still more science fiction than anything else. Since I am approaching a certain age, I would be tempted to say that if modern medicine allows my aging organs and limbs to be adequately supported in the years to come, I would welcome that. So science in this respect is most welcome to help us have a longer, healthier life in this respect. I don't have the impression that so far any form of genetic manipulation or sort of Robocop type of planning is being carried out. Some semi-autonomous systems are already being used, however. For instance, there are military vessels at sea that are equipped with sensors that are able automatically to detect hostile devices that are going to hit them. So they act as a sort of automatic shield for defensive purposes. They are planned to do that. Algorithms do what they are expected to do, what we ask them to do. And I think in this respect, let's not over-dramatize the use of semi-autonomous systems. They can also be used for the common good in this respect, to protect forces, but also to protect civilians. Similarly, robots are already quite often used also for very good purposes. For instance, demining. Rather than sending humans into minefields to demine them, we send robots. And if something goes wrong, well, certainly there is no casualties. There could be financial damage, business damage, but there is nothing like that. People are starting to make experiments and tests with sending robots after a nuclear incident. Rather than sending humans, why don't we send robots if they can perform certain tasks that humans would be able to perform but at great risk? So I think in all these cases, science can be both a boon and a bane, and it is up to us to be able to work in this field. Another issue is drone warfare. I don't know if you discussed that. There was an episode just a week ago in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Aramco was attacked by a swarm of drones. That I think that is a serious issue, and of course, military planners say, well, we don't want to do that, but if the others do it, we have to be able to respond. We have to be able, for instance, to disable these drones that are going to attack, for instance, an oil refinery was the case in Saudi Arabia. Let's imagine a world in the future in which drones will deliver goods in cities. I mean, Amazon is thinking about that. When our cities will be full of drones delivering goods, how can we distinguish those drones that are for commercial purposes and those who could be loaded with weapons, CBRN, and so on and so forth. So I think that in this particular case, it is very much up to us, but also it's better if we are safe than sorry. Finally, the point on education, which is very dear to me, and we also do a lot in our organization in this particular respect. 80% of cyber incidents and intrusions happen because of poor habits of users. If we want our personal data not to be stolen, we have to be aware that if we are using a service online on our mobile phone and not paying for it, we are the product. That is a point that is very often made by people who operate. So to some extent, the citizen in us should trump the consumer. We have to be more aware of the consequences of our behavior. It's not just being sloppy with using personal computers and mobile phones, but also being aware of the consequences, even of some apparent benefits that we may reap from there. Regulating this field is very difficult. To my knowledge, only the European Union, to be entirely honest with you, has tried to set some regulatory limitations to the use of personal data, and many organizations based in Europe are trying to prepare themselves precisely to live up to those regulations. But, for instance, in the United States, there is no such thing. China is a case in which personal data are at the disposal of the party, of the state government. And therefore, we have to be aware that it will be very, very difficult to have a sort of global multilateral regulation about this. But yet again, education, raising awareness is the key in order to overcome these enormous challenges that we are confronted with.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Gallucci, please. Thank you.
I was not in the nuclear weapons group. I was in the law group, Lethal Autonomous Weapons. So what I would do is if I could, I would make a couple of comments about nuclear weapons prescriptions that might go to the common good. So the easy thing, I don't mean easy to do, but easy to identify, is to go back a bit in time, as I was suggesting, to the point when we had more arms control agreements in place than we now do. It's a good idea for an American to say this, since we pulled out of these agreements. I'm thinking first of the ABM treaty, and ABM is, of course, a very difficult problem, as I said before, that people generally would prefer to defend rather than punish the people who killed them. So governments, I think, though, could be persuaded, maybe not tomorrow, but could be persuaded that limits on deployments of ballistic missile defense are possible while research can continue. And that's where we were before, and I think going back to that so that we did not have deployed systems, and if we did not have deployed systems, we would not have to deploy systems to circumvent deployed systems. So I would advocate that as improving the common good. Second, we had a treaty in place until just about a month or 6 weeks ago called the INF Treaty, or the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, which banned a whole raft of weapons, ground-based, intermediate range between 500 and 1,500 and 5,000 kilometers. And that treaty was abrogated, and I would propose that could very easily be put back in place. There is a question about Russian compliance with the treaty, and the Russians have a complaint about American compliance with the treaty, but it would not be beyond the minds of diplomats to figure out a way to put that treaty in place and stop the deployment of a whole raft of new weapons which we don't need and would be provocative and destabilizing. Third, there is a wonderful treaty in place that limits strategic nuclear warheads of both the Russians and the Americans to 1,550 each. That may sound like too many to you, but it's far better than 60,000. And that treaty will expire next year unless it is agreed to be extended by the two parties. Two parties are not getting along so well right now, so a lot of us are not optimistic about this happening as a matter of natural course. But it could be done relatively easily, and I think we would have expected it to be done rather easily in another political age. So those are three treaties to be preserved. I had some conversation with my colleague from Russia about what we might do in the area of cyber and ASAT, anti-satellite weapons. Both of us, if you recall, joined you in identifying these weapons as somewhat uniquely destabilizing or potentially destabilizing, certainly in the midst of a crisis, the cyber attack and the anti-satellite, the ASAT attack. My own view here is that formal arms control in those areas is going to be difficult, very difficult. But informal agreements among experts about what both sides recognize as destabilizing, and if it were to be attempted, would be retaken very badly by the other side. And so the provocation would be officially notified, would seem to me a wise thing to do at least. So an informal arms control, even if it isn't de jure, de facto in place to deal with that, would be a good idea. I would say finally, or not, maybe not finally, that the whole tactical nuclear weapons issue, which I mentioned again, could be addressed by formal arms control agreement. It would require a change in strategic thinking among some people in both countries. But there are arms controllers, both in Russia and the United States, who would see these weapons as not particularly stabilizing. So these are a series of things that could be done that would put us in a much more stable condition to go from possibility to potential. I mean, of eventually elimination. But along the way, if we have to deal with these destabilizing things, I think it's going to be very hard. And then, of course, there are the regional cases, and those, to me, seem to be all matters of diplomacy. and of discussion about political context. Anybody who has ever dealt with the situation and the tensions between India and Pakistan knows that that is not a technical arms control issue. That is a matter of religion, it's a matter of culture, it's a matter of history, a matter of geography. So I don't think that problem is going to be solved, the problem of the ease with which that subcontinent can slip into nuclear war unless real focused political effort is made. I think the problem between North Korea and the United States is manageable. I'm not predicting it will be managed. I just am saying that I think it is manageable. So in all of these areas, I see the possibility of moving to a safer world that's in the common interest, in the common good. It's within reach. I don't think it's at all implausible. It is possible, not only potentially, but it's possible in the near term. And I hope we do something like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for this answer to and comments to the panel. And now we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I don't know what is allowed. Maybe we have to stick to the schedule.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
If there are more questions or something like that, 10 minutes.
Okay. Are there some question or one comment? And maybe we have here Monsignor Tomasi, who play a very important role in the United Nations, and I propose to leave him there for a little address. Thank you, Monsignor.
Good evening, everybody. I don't think I can add very much to what has been said already, except that we need to have a convergence of forces, of groups in advocating the line that Pope Francis has been insisting on, that to have a safer world is a world without any weapons on the part of everybody. Safety and the protection of one's citizens is better guaranteed by not having atomic weapons and similar destructive weapons than by a selective few controlling the situation. I think this is one important point on which we all need to reflect. And it's a struggle because there are economic and political interests at work. But in the long run, idealism becomes a good practice. And if we insist, probably we can achieve something. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, maybe we have just time for one question, because I don't want to frustrate the assembly. If there is some question or reaction, I don't know, or we can conclude our work of today. And I think it was a very exciting day and afternoon, and I thank you very much for your work and for the talks. I think we need maybe a deeper definition of what a common good is and what this common home is in the context of this new technology. And I want finally to thanks again Monsignor Tomasi for all he has done at the level of UN to promote this common home and common good in the context of this weapons race. Thank you, the speakers, and thank you, the audience, for your nice reaction. Have a good night.